My name is Alan Matamana. I'm a managing partner at Fairview. Let me extend my warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming out again and helping us celebrate our 30th anniversary. At this point in the evening, no one wants to hear a long speech, so I will be brief. It's my pleasure to introduce the next segment, which is a fireside chat with Larry and Joanne, moderated by Bob Green. Bob is uniquely positioned to moderate this panel for two reasons. First, he is the two-time president and CEO of the NAIC, which is an association that represents diverse-owned private equity and hedge funds. Joanne, as you know, was the predecessor to Bob. She was the president of the NAIC before co-founding Fairview. In addition, Larry served as the chair of the board of the NAIC during that search that culminated in the hiring of Bob. So Bob was present at the start of Fairview's founding, and Fairview was present at the start of Bob's tenure at the NAIC. And it's a relationship that goes back now a couple of decades. The second reason is Bob is an industry veteran. He knows the ins and outs of private equity and venture firm formation, and most importantly, knows what it takes to build an enduring firm. And I'm sure they're going to get into this topic during the chat. Bob was the chair of the board of trustees of the Virginia Retirement System for many years. He was the director of private equity in Arthur Andersen's transaction advisory services practice, where he served some of the most iconic private equity firms in the country. Very excited for this conversation. Please welcome Bob, Joanne, and Larry.
You talk about pressure. Interviewing Larry and Joanne at the same time, anywhere, let alone at Fairview's 30th anniversary. So as we often say in the South, y'all pray for me, please.
That's good.
So I did not know that they were going to have a wonderful video that talked about everything I planned to ask them about. So Joanne told me, Bob, just ask anything, it doesn't matter. And I realize now why she was so comfortable. So we're going to have to spend a lot more time talking about the nature of your relationship and the people and the team, and the history is certainly well recorded. But I do want to I want to take a point of personal privilege. Alan mentioned it, but my connection with both of you is very long and very deep. And I've looked to both of you at different times for guidance. I've appreciated most of your mentorship, all of yours, Larry, but most of yours, Joanne. And very, very grateful for this opportunity to share time with you. So why don't we jump in? Joanne, I think the story starts with you, and so I'm gonna start with you. Washington, D.C., trade association executive. As you describe it, happy in your job, liked what you were doing. And then you have this fateful meeting at your NAIC board of directors. Pick up the story from there.
Thank you, Bob.
Y'all saw that look, right?
So it's interesting because at the meeting earlier, there was a mention of Syncom Capital and Herb Wilkins. And it was Herb Wilkins that had, as an investor in their fund, Syncom, a fund of funds. And as we were talking about an opportunity to begin to acquaint the marketplace with this capital opportunity, they were looking for someone to take on this project. And at that point, I was, of course, president of the trade association. And they traveled all over the country looking for a man.
Literally?
Literally, to do that job. And they weren't successful because, of course, Fairview Capital would be a startup,
right,
as a fund of funds. And so they came to me and said, Joanne, you are going to have to do it. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I enjoy my job.
Right.
I said, just go back out and keep searching. You'll find somebody. But ultimately, I decided to do it because I believed in the industry, in the people, in the companies that were basically executing and doing this work around the country. Mm-hmm. And I felt, since we were going to go to public pension funds, that obviously was going to be the marketplace, that it would be very important for those funds to understand that there was an industry in place investing in companies successfully all over the country. And the only need and that was necessary was capital. And so because of that, I decided that I would pursue the opportunity.
Emotionally, how did you prepare yourself for it? I mean, you had been in your role a while. You were known for what you were doing. As you used to tell me, you got in a lot of deep conversations with a lot of managers, helping them at their craft. How did you prepare yourself emotionally in 1992 to go out and raise a fund of funds?
I'm glad you asked me that question.
I'm so glad you're glad.
I was having lunch one day with an individual, and of course that individual knew about the fund of funds opportunity because the whole industry knew it around the country. And I talked to him about what he was interested in doing next in his own life. And as the conversation continued, right literally in the middle of the conversation, I just stopped and I said, Larry, would you be willing to consider being my partner at Fairview? And of course, Larry, for all of you that know him, he has to study it, review it, contemplate it, take it, and do all the database stuff that he does. And so it took him about 2 or 3 months to decide to pursue the opportunity. But that's exactly how it happened. And from there, it was important because with the trade association, you had companies all over the country. And I think that was a real benefit. Larry, he was on the investment side of the business, and he also had that national network. And so that was very important to being able to successfully raise a Fairview capital.
Well, I was going to transition to you, but Joanne transitioned to you. So you have this fateful meeting with Joanne. The conversation goes, she's blunt about posing the question, and I just saw you motion 6. Was that 6 months?
6 months. Right.
Pick it up from there, Larry.
Well, not to digress, Bob, but Joanne mentioned the fact that I had been a practitioner. I'd been a practitioner at that point for over a decade, I think 11 years. And I began my career at a venture capital firm in Boston called UNC Ventures. One of the guys who hired me is here tonight, James Norton. I want to thank him for giving my first job in this business. And then 5 years into it, I was hired away by a firm in New York. And the guy who hired me there, Dwayne Hill at Equico Capital, is also in the room. So it goes full circle. So I'd been a member of the association for about a decade. I knew Joanne as a trade association leader and had enormous respect for her, as did everyone in the business. So the first thing is, if Joanne asks you something, she's serious about it. So I took the question seriously, but it came so out of the blue. Right. It was the last thing on my mind. I thought, well, Joanne, let me think about it, and I'll get back to you. That was, pause, evade, if you will, but take it seriously. I'd never heard of I knew the industry was attempting to do something, but I didn't know much about the fund of funds model, the construct. And yes, you're talking about your career, right? So you need to take some time to evaluate or determine whether or not you think this thing has a legitimate shot at being successful. And as the video alluded to, part 2 for me was the most important decision you make in this business is who you partner with. Yeah. And so for all of my respect and admiration for Joanne, I didn't know whether or not we could be good partners. I just knew that I admired and respected her. Right. But working with somebody to build a business is something of a completely different order. And so after coming to the conclusion that I thought we could probably be successful, then the question was, how do we spend some time getting to know things about one another that we don't now know? Because the pressures of doing this are going to be significant, and there will be all sorts of reasons to either walk away or not cohere. And I thought it would be unfair to Joanne to partner with her unless I had reached the conclusion I thought we had a legitimate shot at being really good partners. So we took the time. I visited her home. I got to know her husband. I visited her church. She visited mine. She got to know my wife, Pamela. We spent time together, and eventually sort of reached the conclusion, well, we should try this. We should do it. And so from that point, I was on board.
So there is an old adage that opposites attract, and it's not fair. I was getting to it, y'all. I was getting to it. It is not fair to say that you all are opposites, because you have a lot of things in common, right? There's some core values that are resident and evident in both of you. There are leadership qualities that you both have. There are many things, and I won't recount them here, but there are some differences in personality. And I would love to ask each of you to talk about what has made, because it's obvious you have a great partnership, what has made this a great partnership, given that your personalities are, I'll use the word complementary, and in some cases, supplementary. And I'll let you all put further adjective around it.
I'm going to let Joanne start on
All
this.
right, let's see where she goes. Let's see where she goes, Larry.
I'm trying to think about how to start that. Well, actually, Larry did know me, but he did not really know me.
Right.
And I think part of his own due diligence, I assume, probably was about, who is Joanne Price,
Yep.
I would guess. But the truth of the matter is, I think the reason he didn't do his diligence for a year, which it could have been,
Right.
was I'm pretty easy to know.
Mm-hmm.
You know who I am, what I do, my approach, my attitude. I lean in, push in pretty extensively, I guess you could say. And I think it's important that we know our gifts.
Yeah.
And one of my gifts is that I'm very inquisitive, and I'm comfortable around all people. And I'm interested in knowing as much as I can know and as much as people will share with me. So I think part of it for me with Larry and running a trade association, so you knew all the personalities,
Yep.
you knew what everybody thought about all the personalities, so you had all that data in advance. And I did not think it would take long for Larry to do his diligence really on me.
Right.
Because I was pretty open. So it'd just be a matter of whether he felt comfortable
Right.
being a partner with me.
Mm-hmm.
So no question but that Joanne, for all appearances, is an extrovert.
Yep.
And me, for all appearances, I'm an introvert. That much is obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But what people don't perceive initially about the two of us is something that you alluded to with respect to core values.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which is something we discovered about one another as we got to know each other better. Our bedrock values are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
In fact, I would even argue identical. It's one of the things that kind of reinforced our bond. But the other things that were important to us over time, we did not know when we came together as partners, and they proved to be of enormous value. Joanne is infinitely curious. Mm-hmm. She's right. There is no question that she will not ask. When confronted with a problem, we discovered very early on, Joanne would take off and go in this direction, and I would take off in the other direction. And she would circle this way, and I'd circle that way. And by the time we came back together, we found we had asked every possible question you could ask, or at least exhausted our own store of questions. And there was strength in that. Mm-hmm. That complementarity was something that was a gift, right? Joanne is incredibly smart. Mm-hmm. Her intuitive sense.
Thank you, Larry.
No. Her intuitive abilities, the things that I like to say she can see around corners.
Yeah.
Right? And I picked that up very early on. over time, you not only learn your partner's gifts, but you also learn from them if you're paying attention. And I think that's symbiotic. I think that cuts both ways. I think we've rubbed off on one another, if you will, in that way. But our fundamental approaches to problem solving, superficially, are quite different. But they're very complementary. And we discovered in our work that it was a source of strength. And one of the things that we sort of modeled initially for younger professionals in the firm was that you can have very different approaches to evaluating an opportunity. The important thing was there are no dumb questions. Ask everything. Try not to miss anything so that you can dimension risk appropriately, right? And in the process, you can disagree vigorously. Joanne and I have had, we've had vigorous, strong conversations over many years.
We don't believe that.
Yeah, no. But our respect for one another is so deep and fundamental that everyone understands that we've never had a personal word of disagreement. Okay, we've never said an unkind thing to one another. I just have an enormous respect for her as a human being. Her integrity is just beyond question. I've never had a sleepless night because I had to worry about how my partner conducts business, that sort of thing. I mean, all of those things matter.
And trust.
Exactly.
Fundamental
You have to
trust.
have trust.
Right. But, at the end of the day, it's about making good decisions as you're seeking to put your investors' capital to work, doing the work, and being exhaustive in your analysis. And Joanne and I discovered very early on that we were great complements, and we sought to surround ourselves with people who brought additional dimensions and different ways of processing and looking at things and different lenses and filters, and so it became kind of part of the DNA of the firm.
So in our preparation, and over the years, I've learned how consistent you all are with being humble, with being grateful, and with giving credit to others. Can you talk a little bit about some of the people that come to mind, the early days, but even across the years, that you want to acknowledge on this 30th anniversary?
Oh, my goodness.
Well, I can say with respect to starting Fairview, Bigler Investment Management Company, Peter Siegel, Hal Bigler, they were extraordinary. They recommended our attorney that we had for many years from the beginning. And if you think I'd got on Larry's nerves, I really got on his nerves.
Can you point him out?
Alan Paley, right there.
Alan, raise your hand.
And
He's still with you after 30 years, Joanne, so it
Yep.
couldn't have been that bad.
Yep, he's still there.
Yep.
So I think the other important aspect of this is the trade association itself.
Yep.
And all the members, and there were so many of them,
So I want to cue you, because I know it was important in the prep. Talk a little bit about some of the administrative support you got. You mentioned Angela Johnson.
Angela Johnson was when we decided to headquarter in Connecticut, and we thought that was a very important decision, and it turned out to be a very good decision. Angela was my assistant at the trade association, and in fact, her son is here tonight. My godson is here, and I'll never forget it because Angie said. I said, well, no, we're going to locate the firm in Connecticut after meeting the folks from Bigler Investment Management Company. And I said, Larry and I thought that we would be able to really build most successfully being there. And so we drove up, and of course, I'm not a very good driver. So she drove, I rode. And so she was our first employee, Angela Johnson. And she was extraordinary because there was just really the three of us. And so whenever I got lectures from Larry on one thing or another, I got many lectures from Larry on a variety of issues. Angela, half of the time she would be there and she said, ooh. And just kind of funny. But I think we were a team of 3.
Yeah.
And it was, and she was a wonderful addition, especially in a startup. Mm-hmm. And her role was really very important. And of course, she didn't know Larry at the time, so obviously the 3 of us became very close in the early years. Peter Siegel was essential. And on the road for fundraising. Mm-hmm. He was on the road all over the country for 2 years, mm-hmm. and that was important. And then when we got tired of each other, we'd take a break. Larry and I were on the road for 2 years, yep. And going to all the public pension funds, by and large, all over the country, mm-hmm. with a variety of interactions, mm-hmm. I would say. But I think, and I'd be interested in Larry's perspective, when you're doing something like this, you have to be able to be comfortable in your own skin. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to lean in. And you have to be able to maintain a certain disposition, because you get no's, no, more than anything else. And in our case, you got disbelief.
Right.
Why do you ever think you could do something like this successfully? And in some cases, and as Larry can say as well, people would say, okay, you've got 20 minutes, say what you have to say and, move on. Mm-hmm. So you just have to believe that you're going to be successful. And that was the belief system.
Larry?
And I would just say, as a part of that process in the early years, going out, attempting to raise capital, and as Joanne mentioned, sort of having a prepared mind that going in, you're likely to be facing an audience that is, to put it mildly, skeptical. There were also the occasional surprises where you knew walking in the room, based on how you were greeted, that there was at least an openness, as opposed to the cases where you walked in and people's eyes would glaze over and you knew that they were doing somebody a favor to take the meeting, but had zero interest in what mm-hmm. you had to say. And it only took a few of those, quite frankly, to get to yes, to keep you at it. But we were very clear about the fact that 90+% of the time we were unlikely to be successful. But we believed in what we were doing, and we thought it was worthwhile doing, and we were committed to doing it. Mm-hmm. So we never entertained the idea of leaving the playing field. Mm-hmm. Just didn't accept that as a possibility.
So, and the audience will appreciate, there's so many follow-ups I'd love to ask you, but we have to get through 30 years.
Sure.
This is a 30-year story.
Right.
And so
yeah.
I'm not going to do all the follow-ups that I want to do.
Right.
But I will touch on something. We're going to get to culture in a minute. But before I get to culture, I want to talk about this extraordinary investment thesis. Frankly, 2 of them, right? That you all have incorporated into the firm, because Fairview has very much, in the fullness of it, lived out the original interest that the NAIC board had, which is gathering capital and allocating it to diverse managers.
Right.
You absolutely have done that, and you do that to this day.
Right.
But over time, you identified another opportunity. Maybe I'll start with you on this one, Larry. Can you talk about Fairview's investment theses and what's been most compelling about both of those?
Okay, so no question but that our initial entry into the market was one of being a firm that was going to be open to anyone walking in the door with a compelling investment thesis, irrespective of their packaging, so to speak. That was immaterial to us. It's the quality of your ideas, it's what your experience base is, it's what due diligence would tell us about your ability to execute. Mm-hmm. And can you make this thesis real? Can you make money for our investors? Coming to a positive decision on that. That's irrespective of things that come subsequently in terms of sectors of the market that we might focus on. So yes, the initial thrust was to be able to aggregate as much capital as we possibly could to talented, diverse fund managers who had demonstrated their ability to put this kind of capital, institutional capital, to work profitably with people, diverse people across the country. Yep. But the investment talent, the technical expertise of the people doing this work was in venture capital and private equity investing.
Right.
Period.
Right.
That doesn't know, color or race, right? You're either a good venture capitalist or not a good venture capitalist, good private equity professional, competent, talented, or not. And so when the opportunity presented itself 6 years into the business to raise a pool of capital focused on what would be considered, firms of long vintage and substantial histories, investing, venture capital with some of the most talented entrepreneurs in the country, we didn't hesitate. We didn't think somehow we can't or shouldn't be doing this. It's simply another dimension of what we're already doing.
That's right.
It's just that now you're dealing with folk who've been raising capital for a decade or 2 decades, or in some cases 3.
Right.
Right? And so off we were into a segment that we hadn't had access to previously. It was a little bit easier to aggregate substantial pools of capital for that sector than it was for diverse managers. And so we closed our first, pure venture capital fund of funds, if you will, in December of 1999, and have been doing it ever since, as we have continued to raise pools of capital focused on emerging managers, in addition to, of course, having the opportunity to co-invest on occasion with managers in our portfolio.
What have you observed about the synergies between the two?
So here's the thing about having the opportunity to invest with some of the most venerable venture capitalists in the country, and being able to attend their annual meetings, getting their reports, observing their disciplines and how they prosecute their business. The lens that you develop as a result of that is a lens that we apply across our portfolios, period. So what is best in class is best in class. And our standards are no different, whether we're looking at so-called venerable managers of long tenure or emerging managers. We're looking for the same qualities.
Right.
And if we don't see those qualities, we're unlikely to commit our investors' capital to any given group of managers. One of the things that's interesting about the so-called venerable venture capitalist space is it's dynamic. Yes, there are firms that have been in business 10, 20, 30 years, but if you look over time at those firms, any number of talented people have spun out of those firms and formed emerging manager firms. They might not have been called emerging managers, they're just kind of new iterations, if you will, of a particular firm, in some cases prosecuting a slightly different strategy. Maybe they'd intuited some segment where they thought they could be dominant that others weren't paying attention to. And so we already had the expertise to identify what's different and there's some things that are different and necessary when you are an emerging manager.
Right.
There is a level of grit and determination and stick-to-itiveness and resolve that you need to survive. And some people don't have it. And they will leave the playing field, sometimes early, sometimes after a period of time. But those that have made up their minds that this is a business that they want to be in, that they're going to do everything it takes to build an enduring franchise, they exhibit certain sorts of qualities. And over time, you develop a certain measure of pattern recognition about what those things are. So when we're looking at people spinning out of the so-called venerable firms, even though they've been successful inside those firms, now they're going to be doing something a little bit different, which is building a firm of their own. And that takes some slightly different characteristics and qualities. So it's been symbiotic.
Yeah.
We've learned some things looking at people who've been doing it for a very long period of time and doing it incredibly well. We've learned other things from people who've had to start from scratch and build something. and what that takes. And so it's benefited us on both ends of the spectrum, if you want to call it that. We view our business holistically.
Right.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
I'm going to move to, see the partnership at work. This is the partnership at work. So I'm going to move to culture now, because the culture of Fairview, you heard two of your partners say it tonight. I'm getting a wrap-up signal. I bet y'all don't have to wrap up, do I, Joanne? Can I go a little bit longer?
Are you getting a wrap-up signal?
Yeah, I got a wrap-up signal.
Okay.
But let's talk about culture, and then I'm going to do succession. So, if that's okay. So,
Sure.
You have built a palpable culture in your firm. It has been deliberate, and it is obvious. Talk about what is the Fairview culture, and how did it evolve?
We indicate to people to come to Fairview as you are. Bring all of your gifts and talents to the table. Period. Now, it may take some time because everybody has a different personality to be able to do that, but over time, that does happen. And we want people to really present and be comfortable with their talent, because that's why they're there, and that's why we've chosen them to be there. And I think Fairview has been able to do that, and we've been able to grow because of that. And it's because if there's no humility in what you're doing, and I think that's true between Larry and me, the humility part of building is essential. And I will say to you, if you don't have it, I don't think we would be here today as Fairview Capital. So that was and has been quite extraordinary. I mean, we've made mistakes. We've had some things that have happened where we've said, Larry, it's not working. Right. And we'd had to kind of put that away. And then we move on. And I think we've been able, and then on one last thing, at times when I've been kind of down, Larry said, okay, Joe, let's kind of keep going. He's up. If he's down, I said, it's okay, Larry. Step back. We're moving forward. So that mutual respect was clear to everyone in the company.
So you role model that.
And not just that, the differences. We're different people,
Right.
and people were comfortable with that.
Yeah, Joanne talks about sort of bringing your gifts and your talents, if you will. One of the ways we've sought to express that in our conversations in the room, sitting around the table together, is to bring your best thinking. You're not, if you're sitting at the table, it's because we've already determined you have something to give, right? So we don't expect you to sit there and be silent. We want to know what you think, and you have to be comfortable enough stepping out and risking saying things that are on your mind, right? And sometimes they might not come out exactly the way you intend them to come out. It may not be the brightest, idea anyone's ever heard, but in time you get comfortable speaking your mind about things and understanding that that's valued. It's a part of the culture. It's part of what we expect, and that's incredibly empowering. We do believe that good ideas can come from anywhere in the firm, right? We've amazed, maybe too strong a word, but one of the experiences we've had as a firm over time is bringing people in at one level and then seeing that they had gifts beyond what they were hired to do, and then giving them the opportunity and the ability to have those gifts flourish and allowing them to move in the firm as a result of it, right? That too is something that within a firm that feeds into culture, and people perceive that. They get it. They realize that you're paying attention to them, right? If their gifts become visible, we're willing to take advantage of it, right? So, but this business of bringing your best thinking at all times, that is expected and demanded, has sort of been part of the culture from day one.
So building a business, raising a fund, is described as the hardest thing you can ever do in business, right? Creating a firm, creating a company, creating something, particularly if it's successful. I would submit that succession planning is the second hardest. We are in a 50-year-old industry that still has some of the people in it that came up with 2 and 20, right? Henry Kravis, still working. right? David Rubenstein, still raising capital, Warren Buffett, all of these names. You all made a conscious decision 10 years ago to begin the process of being thoughtful and pragmatic about succession planning. And on this 30th anniversary, it's obvious that you put a lot of thought into it. It's obvious that you developed a plan that you believed in, and the fruits of that are starting to be quite evident. Can you talk about the decision that you came to create succession and to, for lack of a better term, institutionalize Fairview Capital?
Go ahead, Larry.
So, part of this has to do with the genesis of the firm, Bob, to be quite honest with you. Given the way Fairview came about and the role, if you will, of the industry association and the many people who were part and parcel of helping Fairview come into existence, Joanne and I always saw ourselves as stewards, right? We were charged with building a successful business, but we were also charged with building an institution that would survive beyond us, right? So we were very conscious about that from day one, that attracting the right talent and people, giving them an opportunity to grow and flourish, stepping out of the way when necessary to step out of the way, and being conscious of the fact that at a certain point in time, it would be necessary to have the next generation step to the fore, because they would be ready to step to the fore. It was done intentionally. So 10 years ago, well, 9 years ago now, when we elevated Cole, Olaf, and Bober to become a managing partner of the firm, and we became initially a management committee of 3, it was to begin the process of turning over.
Of watching him.
Yeah.
And watching and observing him.
And giving him opportunity. Giving him opportunity.
Which was it, Cola? Both?
Giving him additional opportunity to grow and to expand.
Yep.
Because we had determined that he had tremendous gifts, right? And it was also a part of our thinking, even at that time, that beyond a certain point, as others demonstrated that they continued to grow and evolve, we would elevate others to become managing partners, and we'd begin to recede and step back. And at some point, remove ourselves from the platform. So that was conscious on our part. One of the other beauties, quite frankly, of having had the opportunity of seeing really best-in-class firms develop over decades. Some do a very good job of succession planning.
Most don't.
And most don't. And we've had the benefit of seeing some of those who've done it well, and we studied that closely. It was very intentional. So.
I think at Fairview, we have been really very good at being able to welcome all types of people with all types of interests and backgrounds. And I think that has been a great tribute to everybody that's a part of Fairview, and then also to, I think, Joanne and Larry in terms of how we see things. Because, we are different. And we have had some very interesting conversations around our differences. And so the fact that we have always been able to come together and agree, there has never, ever been any competitiveness between us. And there has never been a day where there has been a concern about trust. Never, ever. And when you have that as the core, you can really build a very significant company. And with respect to the 3 partners that you've seen this evening, managing partners, all have been at Fairview in excess of 10 years.
Excess of 15.
15 years, all different backgrounds, coming at us from different perspectives and even career. And seeing them now step in and take over. They have the same, what I think Larry and I are both very proud of this, to see them take the firm culture forward, understanding what got us to this point, and then understanding what will take us to the future. And each one came to us differently.
Yeah.
One came from the West Coast, from the venture business. Another came right out of school and moving forward. Another, changed professions and decided that this was the career that they wanted to build. So each one very different, and they have a very positive relationship, and they are developing some of the things that they want to see happen in the future. And their colleagues at Fairview, all of which are here this evening, they see all of this, they watch all of this, they observe all of this, they determine themselves, do we want to be a part of phase 2 of Fairview Capital? So I think I'm so proud of having Larry as a partner and what we have been able to do together, and to be able to make decisions together and move forward together. I don't think the only time we've ever had a crossword was when I came in. I think I took one of his pens. That was very, if anybody knows Larry, all of his items are very important,
Specific.
regardless of what they are. But beyond that,
You didn't take a philosophy book, no
I
Flaubert?
didn't. No, I didn't take any books, so that would have really been bad. But and I think that's made a difference. But people also observe you, watch you, see what you do, see how you make decisions. And I think everybody at Fairview has seen that, and everybody understands that what's expected to them, what is expected of them, is their best. And I think that's been great for the organization.
So I suspect the timekeeper is going to come down on you
Yeah.
very shortly, so I'll be very brief.
I'm getting fired.
I'll be very, very brief on this. But I just couldn't have said that better. The partnership that we've developed over 30 years has been one of the most meaningful of my life. It has been an enormous privilege to be Joanne's partner. And I treasure the things we've been able to do together. And I'm enormously grateful that I'm still here to be able to see what this next generation of leaders is going to be able to do at Fairview. It's a wonderful thing.
Well, as we come to a close, on behalf of the NAIC family, we want to tell you how proud we are of you all. Most people don't know this, but for the first 10 years of Fairview's existence, it was the largest and almost sole sponsor of NAIC. Larry and Joanne were extraordinarily generous. They gave a significant amount of the resources that NAIC ran on in the period after Joanne left. And it's extraordinary how consistent, well, I shouldn't say that, because knowing you as people you are, but it's extraordinary how consistent you all were with living up to all of your commitments and all of your responsibilities. And since there's no box of tissues up here, we're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up. But thank you so much for what you've done. Thank you so much for the legacy of Fairview Capital. And thank you for allowing all of us to share in this 30th anniversary chapter.
Thank you.
Thank you.